Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. I want you to imagine for a moment that an evangelical Christian minister stood up in front of his congregation and said the following. Because I think if a Christian minister had said this, or for that matter, a Buddhist monk, a Sikh, a rabbi at a Jewish synagogue, a pope, a priest, or anybody had said this, I think the left would go ballistic. I think they would go apoplectic. But here is an example of the cultural divide between those of us that live in countries that are based on Judeo-Christian ethics and values and those who are brought up with Islamic values. The Grand Imam of Egypt's Al-Azhar apparently said, he did say, back on his May 10th Ramadan television program, that a wife must not leave the house without her husband's permission, which he deemed a necessity for the household stability and cohesion. This Grand Imam, Ahmed Al-Tayyib, stressed during the program that it's normal for a wife to ask permission to go out except when visiting her parents, and then he added that a woman can only go to work if her husband approves. Otherwise, if she's not going to work, and only if the husband approves her going to work, the wife must stay at home. Now, I think that all of you ought to replay this. All of you men should play this for your wives and see if first of all, I can't be responsible for medical bills or anything else. But I point this out to show the cultural divide between, again, those of us who believe in Judeo-Christian ethics and values and those who believe in Islamic values. Now, Tayyib made another controversial statement on May 20th. That may have been at the end of Ramadan, I'm not sure, when he said that equality between men and women goes against nature. And then it's like every 10 days, because on May 10th he made the first statement, then May 20th, and on May 30th, he dropped another bombshell with a fatwa allowing husbands to beat their wives as long as no bones are broken, which of course sparked, controversy on social media in Egypt and in the Arab world. And it was not long before he retracted that statement, instead calling for regulations to criminalize the beating of women. So some beatings will be more equal than other beatings, and some beatings, if you only leave a bruise that allows for, that lasts for a week, those are okay. Now, the sad part is some Egyptians actually support Tayyib, but others have deemed his remarks restrictive to women's freedom. No feces, Sherlock. Seriously? They also believe that his fatwa is in direct conflict with the Constitution of Egypt. Mahmoud Mahana, a member of the Supreme Council of Scholars at Al-Azhar, said that according to Sharia, a woman must obey her husband. Tayyib, he says, this scholar, this Mahmoud Mahana, man, I just have a hard time with those names, said this: Tayyib did not say anything strange or new. His statements are in line with the Islamic religion. The majority of old and modern scholars agree that a wife has to ask her husband's permission before leaving the house. For some scholars, he continues, women have to ask permission even to visit their parents. And according to Sharia, a man is also allowed to hit his wife, but not brutally. Can you imagine the Supreme Court cases? I was reading a Supreme Court case earlier about statutory interpretation. I know I don't have a life, but it was a fascinating case because Justice Gorsuch delivered the majority opinion and Justice Kavanaugh sided with the minority. Justice Gorsuch's decision in this statutory interpretation case was joined by Justices Ginsburg and Sotomayor and Kagan, I think. And on the dissenting side, Justice Kavanaugh was joined by Justice Thomas and I think Justice Alito. I'm not sure where Chief Justice Roberts fell out. But the whole point of that is that we had an entire Supreme Court case that threw out some convictions of a couple of criminals and sent it back to the Fifth Circuit for a rehearing on the sentencing of these criminals. And I think maybe even a new trial, but it's been a couple of hours since I read it, and I don't remember. But the point being, we go through an entire elaborate process of appealing to the courts of appeals and then eventually making it to the U.S. Supreme Court to determine whether or not two criminals who are unequivocally guilty of a crime of robbery with a firearm, whether or not this particular statute is constitutional based on the lower court's interpretation of that statute based on the plain meaning of the words. And Justice Gorsuch said it is not constitutional, and the majority, with the liberals, said no, it is not constitutional and sent it back for a rehearing. Can you imagine the kind of Supreme Court cases that, again, according to Sharia, a man is allowed to hit his wife, but not brutally? We have a 5-4 decision in the case of Brown versus Brown about whether or not, actually this wouldn't be the case, because if I were to hit Tamara, although not brutally, I'd probably not be doing this podcast. Yeah. I'd probably be in a full body cast somewhere, or I'd be at room temperature and I'd be in a mausoleum or a graveyard somewhere. Actually, I wouldn't do that. I'd be cremated, and that would be that. But just imagine for a moment a case in which the interpretation is whether or not when the man hit his wife, was it done brutally or non-brutally? Now, this expert, this member of the Supreme Council of Scholars at Al-Azhar, went on to explain that under Sharia, if a woman disobeys her husband, he has the right to discipline her either by, quote, lightly beating her without causing her major physical harm, or by refraining from having sex with her. Now, I know you women that are listening are laughing right now and thinking, punishment? He added that the Prophet used to beat his wives with something called a miswak or a miswak. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It is a tooth-cleaning twig. You're going to get a branch off a tree and you're going to whip your wife with it. Muhammad al-Shalat al-Gayandi, a member of Al-Azhar's Islamic Research Academy, concurred with Mahana's views. He stressed that a woman should not leave the house to visit her parents without the permission of her husband, noting that women have a duty to obey men in Islam. He told Al-Monitor that, quote, there are several examples in Islam that support this claim. Aisha, the Prophet's wife, used to ask him if she could go visit her parents. Western civilization is slightly different. Tamara's been at the undisclosed location for about a week, as she is often prone to do when school is out. Boy, she hits I-25 in a New York minute, and she's down sitting on the back porch watching the bear and the deer and the elk and everything else and listening to the river run through the backyard, and I'm sitting here doing a podcast. Yeah, and I'd probably get beat if I didn't stay here and do the podcast. That's how it works in our society. How does it work in yours? There is, if you do not believe, I talk about the cultural divide in this country, but talk about a cultural divide in civilizations, bam, there's one right there. Ooh, should I have said bam? Because if that caused any woman out there to hurt herself, I deeply apologize. Speaking of beatings, there's a website called eater.com, and they have a story that is headlined, Milkshakes, Eggs, and Other Throwable Protest Foods Ranked. As a nonviolent act that leads to humiliation, hurling these foods is the ultimate act of dissent. Now, I truthfully, maybe I've heard of the Eater website, but I don't recall the Eater website. But boy, I'll remember it now, because they are actually advocating that if you're going to go protest somebody, and of course, if you are aware, the milkshakes were used as a method of protest in the United Kingdom. Nigel Farage was hit with milkshakes on numerous occasions as he was just either involved in a marching down the street or whatever. And that's not even to count the acid attacks that have been going on in London lately. But now they're actually advocating that milkshakes, eggs, and other throwable protest foods are a way of, now they call it a nonviolent act. And that these nonviolent acts of throwing milkshakes, eggs, and other throwable protest foods, that you should use these foods because it leads to humiliation. And that hurling these foods is the ultimate act of dissent. But they're nonviolent. Now, I don't know about you. I can't put myself in your shoes. All I can say is if I was walking, let's say I was walking in a Martin Luther King march down Martin Luther King Boulevard, or I was involved in some sort of protest for or against some political party, or let's just say I was walking down the street and somebody walked up to me or ran up to me and threw a perfectly good milkshake, threw it so that it drenched my clothes, hit me in the face, did whatever it is, I would consider that to be a violent act. Now, it may not be violent in the sense that it causes bodily harm, although it could. I've never had milkshake or raw eggs or other foods thrown in my eyes, but I would consider it to be a violent act whether there was bodily harm or not. Here's what the story says. After a series of incidents in which anti-fascist protesters, I find that fascinating, anti-fascist protesters, because the anti-fascist protesters are actually the fascists themselves. Because they're just, Nigel Farage, really the guy that's heading up the push for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union, Brexit, he's a fascist? I hardly think so. But then again, we don't understand the definition of concentration camp or death camps or, detention centers or anything else. So I shouldn't be surprised that this story says that a series of incidents in which anti-fascist protesters have hurled milkshakes at right-leaning British political figures, from prominent Brexit Nigel Farage to far right UK Independence Party candidate for European Parliament Carl Benjamin to anti-Muslim activist Tommy Robinson, the ice cream drink, it says, has become a symbol of the resistance. To throw one is nonviolent. Well, that's your conclusion. If I think I could actually press charges for a battery, if you were to throw eggs at me or throw a milkshake or any other food and to hit me with it, I think you violated the laws against assault and battery. But eater is eater. I don't know that they're lawyers. To throw one, the story says, is nonviolent, but the results are humiliating. Press charges against the thrower, which many have, and you look like a fragile and bratty fool. And in bad news for conservative politicians, milkshaking, as it's known, has made it stateside. 2 Saturdays ago, Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz was milkshaked in Florida, making it a global phenomenon. They're advocating throwing food because convenience, it's easy to acquire and carry the object without suspicion. Cost, will hurling this object be the real-life equivalent of the money with wings emoji? Accuracy, how precise of a projectile does the object make, taking into consideration properties like drag, gravity, thrust, and lift? Now, wait a minute. Do you think for a second that some fascist that's out throwing milkshakes, out throwing eggs, bananas, produce, or anything else, do you think they're actually do you think they even know what drag? Well, they probably know what drag is, but it's they think it's how you dress. It's drag is not what it's meant in this sentence. Gravity, thrust, or lift is? But that's what Eater says. For accuracy, you have to take into consideration the properties like drag, gravity, thrust, and lift. And then messiness is the next consideration. Does the object splatter, stain, or otherwise necessitate cleanup that's a pain in the ass? I guess the more messy it is, the messier it is, the better the object. Smell. How much will the physical memory of the act linger in the nostrils, following the target the rest of the day like an unfriendly ghost? symbolic or historical resonance? Does the object represent something greater or reference a long tradition of throwing said object? Finally, humiliation. While admittedly ambiguous, this last attribute can be summed up as, quote, you know it when you see it. And then it goes on to define the convenience, cost, accuracy, messiness, smell, and symbolic or historical resonance of raw eggs, milkshakes. Let's see what else we have here. Spaghetti, produce, Jiminy Christmas, flour. Yes, flour. Wow. And they call us the fascists. Eater website, I never knew you, but now you're dead to me. This was written by Jenny Zhang, who's a staff writer at Eater. Samantha Mesh is an illustrator and educator currently living in Portland, Oregon. No shock there. I haven't talked about the rule of law for a while, but I want to for just a moment. And for those of you who have listened to me over the years know that this is one of my big bugaboos, is I think that we are losing our respect for the rule of law. And institutionally, the rule of law is being chipped away at ever so subtly by Democrats and those on the left. Well, here is an example of what I mean. While discussing immigration laws, the Speaker of the House, Democrat Nancy Pelosi, commented and said this: in terms of interior enforcement, what's the point? She made these comments during a Speaker in the House discussion hosted by Congresswoman Grace Ming in Elmhurst, New Jersey, on Monday, June 24. Now, it's a little hard to hear. Maybe we can get Steve to enhance this audio. But I want to play it for you because me telling you what she said is not nearly as powerful as hearing the Speaker of the House of Representatives. You know, she's third in line, actually second in line to be, she's third president, vice president, speaker, but she's second vice president, then speaker, to be the president of the United States of America. So she is, in essence, the third most powerful person in our government. And she's saying,
when I saw that the president was going to have these it's so appalling. It's outside the circle of civilized human behavior, just to be kicking down doors, splitting up families, and the rest of that. In addition to the injustices that are happening at the border, we have legislation to go forward to address those needs. But in terms of interior enforcement, what's the point? Well, I won't even go into what the motivation might be for that here, because this is not a political event.
Oh, there is no rule of law. Now, remember yesterday I explained that when you come across the border illegally, without authorization, that is a criminal act. And Customs and Border Patrol will charge you with unlawful entry, a crime. And then once you have been adjudicated with that crime, or you've at least been charged and a court date set, you are then handed over to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They will then, in our immigration courts, assign you a hearing date, either for your asylum request or for your whatever immigration request you're making, or thirdly, a deportation request because you have entered the country unlawfully. And those are administrative or civil matters. Those are not criminal matters. But regardless of either one, whether it's criminal or civil, when Nancy Pelosi says that in terms of interior enforcement, meaning that you have overstayed your visa, you have come here and, like Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman from Minnesota did, commit immigration fraud, which, by the way, is a crime, not an administrative matter. Nancy Pelosi is saying, why do we care about enforcing anything once you make it to the interior? Interior enforcement. That's what those things are. She's saying, what's the point? Why do we care? Well, we care because we believe in the rule of law, and we believe in equal justice under the law. And we believe that if you come here and you commit a crime, or For that matter, if you come here and you breach a contract, we expect that you are going to, if you've come here illegally, let's take a weird example. You've come here illegally, so there's a crime. Then you get handed over to ICE. That's an administrative civil matter. But you're in the country illegally. And let's just say, take a hypothetical, don't argue with me about the hypothetical, that I enter into a contract with you. You have broken the law, you are subject to criminal penalties, and now you're subjected to civil penalties up to and including deportation, maybe even more. But for whatever reason, under whatever circumstances, while all of those things are pending, I enter into a contract with you. I don't care what it is, a contract to do X, I don't know. But then you breach the contract. So now I sue you in civil court for either damages or for enforcement of that contract. And the court sets a hearing. You don't show up. I get a default judgment against you. And now I try to enforce that default judgment either through a garnishment or collection of, go against your wages or go against your property or whatever else it might be. And if you continue to ignore those things, at some point, that contract breach is going to catch up with you, and I'm either going to force you into bankruptcy or I'm going to take your property, your money, or whatever else because I have followed the law and you have not. So the speaker is saying, what's the point? What's the point is we have the rule of law. And we have agreed as a society that we're going to elect officials at the municipal level, the county level, the state level, at the federal level. We're going to elect these officials and empower them to make rules and regulations and statutes that we agree that we're going to follow. That's part of the social compact of this republic. And Nancy Pelosi is saying, for those who come here illegally and break our laws, why would we try to enforce anything once you make it to the interior? Now, I don't know a lot about incentives or incentivizing. I know how to train a dog with incentives and positive reinforcement. I pretty much know how to raise kids. I've successfully raised 2 children, and I'm helping, by being a good grandfather, to help raise 3 grandchildren. I know how to incentivize people that work for me, to make them want to come to work and to make them want to do a good job. And Nancy Pelosi is incentivizing all of these people who come here illegally to attempt to continue to break the law and come here, because when she says, in terms of interior enforcement, what's the point? She is saying, we don't care. We're not going to enforce the law. This is where the Democrat Party is today. And you can say that I'm being partisan. You can say that I'm a political hack. You can do whatever. Set aside if a Republican, in fact, if a Republican had come out and said this, I probably would be a little more animated than I am right this minute. In fact, I would probably be apoplectic, because you would think that Republicans, conservatives, libertarians would know better. You would think that the Speaker of the House, the third most powerful person in this country, the one that leads that group, the Congress, the House of Representatives, that can force taxes upon us, that can force laws upon us, that you would think she would care about the rule of law. They do not, and don't forget it. The bad thing about Twitter is that it sometimes precludes people from saying things, say to a news broadcast. Instead, they go to Twitter and they just make a written statement. And such is the case with Maxine Waters, because I really miss Auntie Maxine. I've kind of missed her calls for impeachment, which I find interesting that you really don't hear that anymore. But that doesn't mean that Maxine isn't making the news anymore. Oh, she's making news. It's just that she's doing it on Twitter, and, not that many people are on Twitter. I know that there are, probably 1 billion users or something on Twitter, but the average American doesn't pay any attention to what Maxine Waters says on Twitter. Well, I do, because I'm just a weirdo. So this would have been on Sunday, the 23rd. Maxine tweeted this about, remember Donald Trump was going to retaliate against Iran for shooting down that drone, and then at the last minute he called the attack off. And everybody is, debating back and forth. What did Trump know, and when did he know it? When did he know about the casualty report estimate, and when did he not know it? What's the real reason behind calling it off? Blah blah blah. I just don't care about any of that. As I said to somebody today, and I know he's listening. As I said to somebody today, Trump probably at the very last minute realized that for the first time in his entire life, not just his presidency, but in his entire life, he probably realized, I'm about to pull the metaphorical trigger, and I'm going to kill people. And I think he found himself uncomfortable with that. So he went back and maybe asked for a reassessment, or maybe he didn't hear the assessment the first time because, I can't imagine that Donald Trump pays a lot of attention during briefings. But, if the Joint Chiefs were briefing him about the airstrike against Iran, he was probably looking at the briefing book and just kind of flipping through it, trying to find the bottom line, and then went back to the Oval Office and got to thinking about, if I do this, people are going to die. And that's a huge decision to make, that you're either going to send American troops into harm's way, or you're going to do something that may cause innocent women and children and civilians to die in a foreign country. That's a heady decision for a commander-in-chief to make. And once he realized that, and somebody said, well, the casualty figure is estimated at, 150 people. And suddenly he realizes that he might have the blood of 150 innocent civilians on his hands, and he pulled back and said no. What I find interesting about that decision is that people all across the political spectrum have either jumped on the decision as they oppose Trump, but they think that's a great decision, or they hate Trump and they hate the decision, or they love Trump and they like the decision. Every combination you can imagine. We'll leave it to Maxine, though, to stand out above all others. She tweeted on June 23rd the following: Trump, you get no credit for so-called stopping the strike against Iran. Why was the unmanned drone in Iran's airspace? Why the surveillance? Don't provoke and then pretend innocence. Now, former Special Ops, Army Ranger, I forget which, maybe both, Congressman Dan Crenshaw from Texas saw that tweet and calls her out for the lie. Congressman Crenshaw tweeted, "This is a shocking comment from a House committee chairwoman. She is literally repeating the lies of the Iranian regime. What a disgrace. Maxine Waters' hate for Trump runs so deep that she is willing to take Iran's side over the word of the U.S. military." These are the same people that said Trump couldn't question the intelligence community's conclusions that are now actually attacking the intelligence community, and they're taking Iran's side just outright, just simply taking the side of the Iranians. Trump derangement syndrome does very strange things. If you are working, you're in medical school and maybe you're doing your internship, or you're working on some sort of sociological or psychological thesis, you might want to study Trump derangement syndrome, because there is a plethora of examples out there that you could use to make whatever premise you want to try to prove. Maxine, you're batcrap crazy. Do-gooders everywhere are always trying to change our behavior, because the do-gooders believe that they know better how we should behave than how we think we should behave. There was a story recently, and it was on one of the local Colorado news stations. And the story was about homeless people. And homeless people, for those of you who aren't familiar with Denver, we have what's called light rail. It's the typical light rail system that, it's brand new in Colorado. Well, it's not all brand new, but a lot of it's brand new. And it's the kind of rail system that has the tracks and the electrical grid, and it's got the power lines above it. And I look at that light rail system today, and I think to myself, it looks really nice, new and shiny, and everybody loves it. And well, I shouldn't say everybody loves it. I think it's stupid, and I think it's a waste of taxpayers' money. But everybody looks at it and thinks, oh, how nice. Look how modern we are. And of course, all of the people that are looking at it and thinking how nice and modern it is are looking at it from Interstate 25 as they see it traveling down on the median of the interstate. They're not riding it. They're just looking at it and thinking, oh, isn't that nice? I look at it, and because of the design, all I can think of is the similar rail systems that they have in places like Moscow, where they have been there for decades and decades, and they suffer from a lack of government funding because the ridership is so low that it's just deteriorated to the point that it looks like crap. And so when I see the light rail going through Denver as I drive along I-25 and I look over and I look at the empty cars going past me, I think, yeah, it looks really nice and shiny and new. And all of the do-gooders in Colorado are so proud of themselves. They're about to break their arm, patting themselves on the back because, oh, look, we're a modern city now because we have light rail. Long story short, one of the local news stations talking about homelessness in Colorado, particularly in Denver, pointed out that a lot of homeless people are riding the light rail system from Union Station in downtown Denver. I think it's called the A-Line. Don't hold me to that because I don't know, and let me emphasize, I don't care. They ride this line that goes from Union Station out to Denver International Airport. I've seen where it ends at Denver International Airport because I've stayed in the, I forget, it's a Wyndham. I forget what hotel's out there, but I have stayed in that hotel. And where the hotel and the terminal meet down on the ground level, apparently homeless people are beginning to camp out. Now, I find that ingenious. Nobody should ever say that homeless people are stupid because these people are not stupid. Because here's what they're doing. They're riding the light rail out to the airport. They get off at the airport, so they're not staying anywhere, in the crime-ridden areas of Denver where the homeless congregate. They're now congregating out by the airport. The airport is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Even in a snowstorm, the terminal's going to be open whether planes are flying or not. So if you want to go in and you want to use one of the public restrooms to, wash up a little bit, clean up a little bit, you can do that. And then if you've, collected enough money, panhandling or whatever, or you've got an EBT card, well, then you can go to one of the restaurants in the terminal and you can have Taco Bell or a McDonald's or something, and you can feed yourself, and then you can get back on the light rail and you can ride back into Denver. But here's what the story said that caught my attention. Yes, I find it ingenious that they are going out to the airport to do their overnight stays and using the airport facilities and then coming back into town during the day. Yes, that's interesting enough. But what caught my attention was this report noted that almost all of the homeless people don't pay to ride the light rail. Then they went on to say that in Denver, which is probably true in most cities, and I'm about to tell you an example in New York City, nobody pays to ride the light rail. They're jumping the turnstile. Now, I'm tempted to go out. There's a light rail station, maybe I don't know, 7 miles from my studio. And I'm thinking about going out, and I'm going to buy a ticket just in case because I don't want to be the one person that finally gets caught. But according to this news report, there are no conductors. There's no turnstile. There's no checking of tickets. So you can just jump on the light rail and ride all day long, and the chances of anybody ever asking to see if you paid the fare are about zero. Now to the story in New York. If you've ever been, now this is not true in Japan. In Japan, they queue up in single file lines and are extremely courteous getting on and off trains in Japan. But in New York, as they probably are in most major American cities, they're always trying to shove their way onto the cars. And then the government officials are trying to shove the public into the cars. So everybody's shoving. And never mind that the subways in New York are full of robbers, gropers, stinkers, and pushers. And never mind that the public buses are horrible to ride, crowded, jerky, slow, complete with atrocious customer service. New York public transportation pretty much sucks. And if you don't believe me, do this. Go to the Hyatt Hotel and go to Grand Central Terminal and go down and just jump on one of the subways. And if you're not content doing the subways, do one of the trains. Do a train up into Westchester County or a train out to New Jersey or somewhere and just see for yourself. Or maybe you could join me and we'll go ride light rail here in Denver and we'll ride it for free, except that we'll buy a ticket just in case we get caught. But here's the problem in New York. As horrible as the conditions are, a quarter, 25% of the commuters that are crowding up and sometimes stinking up the bus or the subways are not paying their fare. Here's the New York Post. More and more riders are boarding city buses without paying the fare, according to new Metropolitan Transit Authority data for the first quarter of this year. The cheapskates run most rampant on local bus routes, where one in every four riders skirts the fare, representing a 35% spike from the same period in 2018. The Post continues. Turnstile jumping on the subway is also on the rise, though it remains far less frequent at approximately 3.9% of riders, according to the data released ahead of the agency's board meeting. By comparison, transit agencies around the globe average fare evasion rates of 2.1% on subways and 4.1% on buses. And here's why it's more true in New York than anywhere else. Last February, the Manhattan Prosecutor's Office, the one that is obsessed with finding any way of going after Donald Trump, has skipped out on the idea of prosecuting bus fare jumpers. You see, that's just not important. It's the whole idea of the broken windows theory. If you're not going to prosecute anybody, that word gets around. So there are no consequences for people's actions when they decide to skip the turnstile or just jump and not pay the fare on the bus or the subway. How many people do you think are riding light rail in Colorado that are never paying the fare? I want to find out. Because this is another example of the decay and the turning of America into a third world country. Victor Davis Hanson had a really great article. I'm not going to pull it up. He had a really great article over at National Review about America's first third world state, California. And when you think about the homelessness problem in San Francisco and Los Angeles and, well, for that matter, everywhere throughout California, it really is turning into a third world. How does that happen? It happens because you decide at some point that the system has become overwhelmed and you are no longer going to enforce the laws. It goes back to my theory about the rule of law. If the Speaker of the House of Representatives doesn't think that we ought to do interior enforcement of immigration laws, if Mayor de Blasio, the communist that runs New York, or if Michael Hancock, the Marxist progressive that runs the city and county of Denver, if none of these people think that people ought to be held accountable for jumping the turnstile, then more and more people are going to soon recognize, well, why should I pay the fare? And pretty soon you have utter chaos. And then what you have before you have the other chaos is you have a system that simply cannot sustain itself financially. And that's going to happen to the New York's transit system. And eventually that's going to happen to the Colorado transit system. Mark my words. You know how I often talk about identity politics and the fact that the left eventually starts eating its own because things like identity politics are inherently unsustainable, to use a favorite word of the left. Well, that's what's happening in San Francisco, speaking of homeless. Homeless advocates are going to war with a gay sushi restaurant because they have put a rock painted in the rainbow colors in this little kind of indentation in the front of the restaurant. It's interesting because, well, here's what's got people upset. The rock painted in the rainbow colors for the gay community is big enough that if a homeless person wanted to sleep in this little, just imagine you're walking along a street in San Francisco and you're walking along a restaurant, and then there's a slight indentation by maybe a couple of feet indented off the sidewalk, and then maybe 3 or 4 feet, 5 feet in length, and then, cuts back out to the sidewalk again for that couple of feet. And in a rock that takes up probably 80% of that consumable space, this sushi restaurant has put a rock, a rock that you would get from a big landscaping company, painted in the rainbow colors of the gay community. They've put the rock there. And the beef is that, well, here's how the Coalition on Homeless in San Francisco tweeted about it. When you want to look inclusive, but you hate homeless people, hashtag anti-homeless architecture seen in the Castro, that's a section of San Francisco, outside a sushi bar. That's right. The Coalition on Homelessness is mad about a rock which sits in this, what the sushi restaurant calls a Zen garden in front of a raw fish joint. Priorities. The left is eating the left. They should be eating sushi, but they're eating each other. And speaking of identity politics, Campus Reform has a story out that goes like this. A feminist teaching assistant suggests men are not women, and the University of California, Santa Barbara students are not happy. The story says, Laura Tanner, a teaching assistant in the Feminist Studies Department at Santa Barbara, is being accused of engaging in transphobia while teaching her class and on social media, as initially reported by Feminist Current. I don't subscribe to Feminist Current, but I do subscribe to Current Feminist. Woman equals adult human female. Surgery/hormones don't equal change sex or gender. No man can ever be a woman, she tweeted in early June, using the sex symbols for man and woman. Then, University of California, Santa Barbara students, there is a feminist instructor on our campus named Laura Tanner who has repeatedly demonstrated hatred and transphobia, both in her classes and aggressively on her social media, according to a Twitter user named Casey, who appears to be a UCSB student, who tweeted later that same day, I am working with a professor from the feminist department to gather students about the disgusting lies she is spreading. Now remember, woman equals, this is what she tweeted, woman equals adult human female. Surgery/hormones can't change sex or gender. No man can ever be a woman. Seems pretty radical to me, right? Now, she previously received criticism for a tweet responding to the news of a transgender activist who was indicted for stealing thousands of dollars from the Portland Women's March. She, the University of California teaching assistant, this woman, tweeted, well, I'm sure he only did it because he is so oppressed. I bet he bought himself a gold lame pocketbook and some red lipstick so he could be a real girl. And of course, that outraged the students. Now, apparently, they displayed her tweets and called her a TERF, T-E-R-F. You see, I try to be informative on this podcast, and while I'm learning something, you're learning something. TERF is an acronym which means trans exclusionary radical feminist, a TERF. Now, as I've said before, intersectionality is a real problem that those on the left are going to have to deal with at some point, because intersectionality is just a subset of identity politics. because I want you to think about this. Are women being demoted from their privileged position, among the left's top so-called victims? And is this demotion a function of the elevation of men who claim to be, of men who want to be, but can never be a woman? That's kind of an interesting conundrum when you think about the transgender war on women as it wages. Wow. Yes, the left eats itself. And I kind of enjoy watching it. I get a really sick satisfaction out of watching this. I read a great story today about how we have become tenants of our own devices. We've become tenants of our laptops, our desktops, our tablets, our telephones. And I'm going to get to that. But before I do, I want to talk about tenants and ownership. Yeah, I know this is a bizarre topic, but I think you're going to enjoy this. So Adam Silver, who is the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, the NBA, he's a far lefty nut job. He told TMZ recently, because there's apparently, unbeknownst to me, there's apparently a controversy within the NBA with the owners of the teams being referred to as the owners of the teams. Now, I don't know. Hang on a second. Let me see. Even on the podcast, sometimes I don't do this in advance. Owner. A person who owns something. The proud owner of a huge Dalmatian, as the example. Well, let's see. Owns. Let's look up the word owns. What does that mean? Owns. A verb. Have something as one's own. Possess. Admit or acknowledge that something is the case or that one feels a certain way. She owned to a feeling of profound jealousy. Take or acknowledge full responsibility for something. Or as an adjective or pronoun used with a possessive to emphasize that someone or something belongs or relates to the person mentioned. Again, I'll use the example. I'm sitting here in my studio and I own this microphone. I own the stand that it's on. I own the pen that I'm using to write my notes with. I own the 2 laptops that are sitting in front of me. I own the desk that is my things are sitting on. I own the chair that I got my lard ass in. I own the clothes that I'm wearing. I own a lot of stuff, as do you, except you'll soon learn that you don't. So back to the NBA. Apparently, if you own an NBA team, that's racist. And so Adam Silver told TMZ that we are moving away from that term, and we have done so for years.
Good afternoon, Adam. How are you?
I'm great.
So congratulations on the season done, another season, and congrats coming up. So I got to ask you. So the 76ers owner moved away from the term owner and now goes managing partner, right? Do you see that happening more in the NBA? Do you like the idea that they're moving away from that term owner?
I do. I don't want to overreact to the term because, as I said earlier, people end up twisting themselves into knots, avoiding the use of the word owner. Yeah. But we moved away from that term years ago with the league. We call our team owners the governor of the team and alternate governors. But so I think it makes sense. As I said, I don't want to overreact, and you'll find the word throughout memos over the past decade in the NBA, but I'm sensitive to it, and I think to the extent teams are moving away from the term, we'll stick with using governor.
Have you had positive feedback from some of the players and whatnot from this?
Yeah, players have gone both ways. I think a few players have actually spoken out and saying the greatest thing that ever happened was when Michael Jordan was able to call himself an owner, but of course Draymond Green has been very public about the fact that we should be moving away from the term, and I completely respect that.
And I completely respect that. This is insanity. Now, you know the reason for this is that most owners of NBA teams are white males, and that the majority of NBA players are black males. So apparently, having ownership of a team comprised of people that are selected not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their merit and abilities, somehow is a recollection of the old plantation days and Jim Crow and what other else stupid relationship they want to draw between the use of the term owner and player. This is insane. But if you listen closely to what Adam Silver, by the way, Adam Silver is a far left nut job anyway. If you listen to what Adam Silver said, he goes, we're kind of I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but we're kind of moving away from the term owner, and we kind of now refer to the former owners as, governors and alternate governors. Well, wait a minute. If we're going to call the owners of these teams in which the majority of the players are black, doesn't that conjure up, the use of the term governor? I'm thinking, first thing I think of, to be quite honest, is I'm thinking of William J. Lepetime, the governor in Blazing Saddles. That's the first governor that came to my mind. But then I started thinking about, I don't know, what was that guy's name? George Wallace. Yeah, George Wallace. Yeah, wasn't he a governor? What about all of the governors during the Civil War? What about all the governors during Jim Crow era? What about all of the governors during the 50s and the 60s? What about all of them? Do you see the insanity? This is so Orwellian. We're not going to call them owners. We're going to find a equally pejorative term. We're going to call them governors. Yeah. Why don't you just, why don't you call them plantation owners and call the basketball players that are making millions of dollars based upon, again, I emphasize, basketball players are not selected on the basis of their skin color. Their preferred pigmentation has nothing to do with whether or not they get selected to play for the NBA. It is a merit-based system. It is a meritocracy. So if they're going to whine, bitch, and moan about the use of the term owner, okay, governor seems to be equally bad. But as I promised you, there was a story that I read. Amazon deleted copies of George Orwell's 1984 from the Kindles, the tablet readers, of its American customers. And of course, when they did that, that invoked the memory holes in the Orwell's 1984, the novel's totalitarian dystopia, and it inspired about equal measures of shock, outrage, and even a few jokes. But in the case where Amazon deleted copies of Orwell's 1984 off people's Kindles after they had purchased the book and after they owned the book on their Kindle, Amazon said the books had been added to the Kindle store by a vendor who didn't actually have the rights to them. An Amazon spokesperson said that when we were notified of this by the rights holder, we removed the illegal copies from our systems and from customers' devices and refunded customers, according to the spokesman. Amazon then apologized and said that in the future it would leave books on people's devices, even if there was an error in how they got there. But one thing that the company couldn't take back is this. By doing what they did, Amazon demonstrated its sheer power over you. Even the biggest traditional retailer, think giant department store, think Walmart, think your local grocery store. Can you imagine them having the power to reach back into a person's home and taking back what it had sold them? Now, the story that I read kind of reminds us that we think that we own things because we paid for them and then we brought them home. But think about things that we buy that run software or have some sort of digital connectivity. The sellers, like in the case of Amazon, continue to have control over the product. So even though you and I think that we For example, I'm holding my tablet right here, my iPad. I do own the iPad. I don't think that Apple can reach into my house and take the iPad back. It's paid for. There's no balance on a credit card. There's no balance on a loan. It was paid for. I own it. But then I think about what I have on here. I have two kinds of music on both my phone and my tablet and my computer. I have music that I have ripped off CDs that I own or DVDs or whatever. And in fact, there used to be a service that you could put all your DVDs into a box and you could send these DVDs off and they would transfer them into either MP3s or AAC encoding, whatever you wanted to use. And then you could download those onto your computer. So I own those songs and I have the digital rights to those songs and I have put them on my iTunes account into my iTunes folder. Then I have songs that I have bought from the Apple iTunes store. Now, what Amazon did then raises the question, do I actually own those songs that I bought from the Apple iTunes store? Or could, if Apple wanted to, could they reach in and delete those songs from all of my devices? Now, I know that's not happening, but connectivity and embedded intelligence are being used by large corporations to increase profits and to exercise as much control as they can get away with. And the story that I read had this example, which I had never heard of. John Deere tractors. You know, maybe you don't own a John Deere tractor, but maybe you own a John Deere baseball cap. Those iconic bright green giants that rumble across those giant fields. They're harvesting wheat, corn, soil. Well, apparently for generations, farmers have repaired those John Deere tractors right on the farm. But John Deere, like the new BMW that I own, John Deere has been pushing toward building ever more automated, sensor-packed agricultural equipment, and they have put software locks on the tractors, which force the farmers to visit a John Deere repair shop. So farmers are complaining that they're charged with exorbitant sums for even simple repairs, and they lose all this time heading out to the shop during the harvest season, having to, either drive the combine, the tractor, or whatever into the whatever, place they bought it from in small town America, only to have a repair done that in the past they could have done those repairs themselves. And of course, that has created this black market where farmers are now going on to all of these kinds of, dark web forums, trying to find software and other things that they can use to make the repairs themselves. But that's not the point. The point is that John Deere has made it impossible. Now, I don't know whether you know, I think I've mentioned that this dumbass woman on her phone rear-ended me in my brand new BMW, and it's been in the shop for 2 months. As I continued to check on the status of the repairs, they informed me at the end of last week that even though the car is nearing repair, they can't turn the car over to me until they take it to a BMW dealership because all of the so-called codes have to clear the computer before they can release the car to me. And even though this repair shop that I'm taking it to is a high-end, high-dollar repair shop, because by golly, I'm going to make her insurance pay out the wazoo for it, because I want the repairs done right, because, my damn it, it's a brand new car with less than 4,000 miles on it. I want the repairs done right. But the repair shop is telling me, despite all the high-tech gear that they have to make sure they do everything right, because of all the computerized stuff in this BMW, they have to take it to a BMW dealership to clear all the codes before they can turn the car back over to me. It's like the John Deere tractors. The farmers can't make their own repairs, which begs the question, do we really own anything? In the digital age, I want you to think, I know Tamara's got she's probably got hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of books on her iPad. And then I think, I'm just curious. Let me look real quickly. Ba ba boop boop ba. Where is my iTunes? I don't know if I can tell. If I look in my library, does it tell me how many songs? Let me look at my phone. Anyway, I don't know. I think I have somewhere near, 10, 11,000 songs on my phone. How many of those are ones that I have transferred from CDs or DVDs onto the phone? And how many are songs that I have bought from the iTunes store? I don't know. But what I do know after reading this is it raises the question, do I really own it? What do you really own? Do you see how both technologically and linguistically we are changing our language ever so subtly all the time? George Orwell would be he'd be flabbergasted by the way things have turned out. He would abhor how things have turned out. But the left, and for that matter, let me rephrase that. Government and the culture are hijacking our language. What do we own? Owners own football teams and basketball teams. They are, it's been in the news in Colorado because Pat Bowlen, the one of the owners of the Denver Broncos, passed away recently. And every news story that I hear refers to Pat Bowlen as the former owner of the Denver Broncos. I think his trust now owns it or something. Does he really own the team? Or is he just a governor? It's insane what we're doing. Thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Remember, you can now find us on iHeart. So if you used to listen to the radio program on iHeart, you can still go to your iHeart app. Just type in Michael Brown Unplugged, and you can get it downloaded automatically to your phone device wherever you happen to listen. You can get us on iTunes. You can get us on Spreaker. And then do me a favor. Follow us on all of the social media platforms. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Michael Brown Today. That's at youtube.com, Michael Brown Today. Follow me on Twitter at Michael Brown USA, and follow me on Facebook. On Facebook, it's Michael D. Brown. And when you like the Michael D. Brown Facebook page, ask to join the discussion group. That's at facebook.com/Michael D. Brown. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.